Newstalk Sauga 960 Raw, Mike Richards, along with David Bastl, and we certainly have a treat here this morning. This is Walking Hockey History, and if there's anything that you ever needed to know about the game of hockey, this is the man that has probably not only been there, done that, he's probably also written about it as well. Just a thrill to have Brian McFarlane joining us here this morning on Newstalk Sauga 960. We say good morning, Brian McFarlane.
Good morning, guys. Good to be with you today.
Well, I would also say this too. If I'm going to talk about hockey history, I want it from a man who's living in a log cabin. That's all I'm saying. There's certainly in the new book, A Hell of a Life in Hockey. I would think there's a lot of things in there that the younger generations would find almost unthinkable or bizarre, in that you can have an owner like Harold Ballard who can be that outrageous and make his influence on who gets to broadcast and who doesn't. I mean, I would think of all the people you've tangled with, maybe the most interesting character, certainly here in Toronto, was Harold Ballard.
Indeed, he was. I even worked with him in public relations, would you believe? If those words fit Harold Ballard, I'm not sure. But I was with him for several months. I don't know to this day whether I quit or was fired. I just went on vacation one day and never came back. And I don't think he wanted me back, frankly. There wasn't much to do in public relations. I would go to him with a problem. One about no women in the press box. He had a kind of an edict, no women in the press box. I went and said, Harold, you're maybe picketed. I mean, the women's movement is in full bloom, and you really should ease the restrictions on that. He said, let's get one thing straight, McFarlane, no effing women in the press box. He walked away.
They're a master of public relations on that one.
That was just one example of
no kidding.
Yeah, and then of course when I defended Darryl Sittler in his dispute with Punch Imlach, Harold took offense at that, and he banned me from any further broadcasts. So I had to go do Winnipeg games for 4 years, and then Montreal games, which was a pleasure. The next 4 years, both those teams, it was fun to work with. And I didn't get back into the press box except for my Hall of Fame nomination. Their induction, they invited me back for one game that night. Yeah. So I had my ups and downs with Harold. One time when he banned me, I had to start the telecasts standing outside of Maple Leaf Gardens. I wasn't allowed in the building, but I was out there introducing the show, and a couple of guys in the crowd said, what's he doing out here? He's supposed to be in the studio. And they said, no, Harold won't let him in the studio. He's going to have to stand out here all winter to open the telecast. Guys, he's going to be bloody cold in here and out there in February. So those funny things happen along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, it's an outstanding book, an outstanding read, one of many, many books I've read of yours throughout the years. I'm kind of curious, though, because Leaf fans are looking forward to tonight's game against the Montreal Canadiens, but you were actually in the radio booth, I believe, for the last time the Leafs actually won a Stanley Cup back in 1967. What do you remember from that game? And did you ever think that after they win that cup that you'd still be sitting here talking about they still haven't won a Stanley Cup? It's really hard to believe.
No, I remember the game vividly. My wife came to the game. She didn't go to very many hockey games, and I'm beginning to think that if we survive long enough, we'll be the only two people who ever saw the Leafs win the Stanley Cup, living people. It was quite a night. I worked with Bill Hewitt that night, and Foster was alongside doing the radio broadcast. And to see these old guys, the oldest team ever assembled to win the Stanley Cup with Bauer and Sawchuk and Army and Fulford and Stanley and all that great group. To beat the Canadiens, who were heavily favored, by the way, to win that series at Maple Leaf Gardens, 1967. And I thought perhaps there'd be another cup or two along the way, but I did know that team was going to be disassembled because of course, that was expansion year, and they were going to lose a lot of players to the expansion teams, and they were old to begin with. And Punch Imlach had pretty much served his time, I think, as Leaf GM. But the changes that took shape pulled the team downhill instead of keeping them on a level course.
Well, looking back, and now originally, Brian, I'm from Stouffville, Ontario, and my head coach as a kid who was so successful was a gentleman by the name of Bob Hazard, who you may or may not have known at that time. And his son years ago in 1974, later on was a Leaf draft pick. But Bob, I believe, was on that team in 1967. And, it's amazing. I look back when our team had won an All-Ontario championship. So George Armstrong showed up to hand out the trophies. And I do miss that time where hockey was still kind of smaller town. It still was quaint. You still had a feeling like, even though Toronto was big, it still had a town feel, and they did go to smaller towns. Unfortunately, I think over the years, it's so corporate, it's so big, the money is so enormous that I think we've lost that community feeling of hockey. I don't think it's coming back because of the money, but I do miss those times.
I agree with you. Stouffville, I think of Keith Acton running the Boston Pete's up there. He's one of my friends, and we try to support him. But
absolutely.
You're right. I look at today's players, and they're very tremendously skilled, but I call them cookie cutters. They all look 6'3" or 4". They're all big, handsome guys with beautiful wives and girlfriends. They're all in perfect shape. They come to the game ready to play. They put on quite a good show, but you talk about George Armstrong. Now, he had a personality, and Eddie Shack had a personality, Jim Dorey and Jim McKinney, and some of those guys from the past would always give you a good story. Tiger Williams, another example of that. George Armstrong, for example, was at Johnny Bauer's 80th birthday party, and all the girls, the ladies, the wives were around him, and they were laughing. And I asked my wife what happened to make them laugh on the way home. She said, "Oh, George is so funny. He told us he didn't like to sign a lot of autographs." And a young man came up to him and said, "George, will you sign my cap right here?" He said, "Okay, I'll do it." And then he said, "How about signing my shirt right across here?" "Okay, I'll sign it." He said, "I bet you'd like me to sign your butt." And the guy said, "Would you, sir?" He said, "Come over here and drop your drawers." And the kid went over and dropped his drawers, and George wrote on his butt, "Johnny Bauer," in a big black magic marker. You don't hear those stories very often.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
Hey, Brian, in this book, there's so many of these good stories, and it just complete hockey for me. The Don Cherry chapter is fabulous. You knew Don basically from day one when he enters the broadcast booth. Did you see the success Cherry would have in those, and I'm not talking about the last couple of years. I'm talking about how strong and popular he was in the 80s and the 90s. A lot of people thought he was more popular than the prime minister at the time.
Yeah, he was a joy to work with. I know people have various views about Don. Some like him, some don't. That's the same with all of us in broadcasting. My first year or two, I came down through the crowd to do the 3 stars one night, and a fella in a bullhorn voice yelled at me, "McFarlane, you're the reason I come to the games. I can't stand listening to you at home." And
Oh, man.
I had to stop and give him a little wave, but I was saying, I hope they all don't feel like that. But Jerry, yeah, he was a great man to travel with. I'd take him to the used bookshop in Montreal, and I'd never buy a book there, but he'd buy 2 big bags full of mostly about sailing ships. He loved sailing ships. And then I took him to the art gallery one day. Well, I say I took him. We went to the art gallery one day and had a good time there. And Don has many sides, and his heart is on his sleeve often. If he likes you, he'll be your friend for life. And I like to think that we're friends for life. He came by this house 2 or 3 times. We have this old log house off the highway. He's going to Kingston, and he caught me Monday morning. "Where are you?" He said, I've driven off that highway 3 times and I'm knocking on your door and you're never home. Why aren't you ever there? And I said, Don, my wife just had time to pull the blinds and lock the door, and we pretended we didn't see you coming up the road, I'm afraid. So he took that in good humor. Yeah.
Well, he's always been one of my favorites, always super kind to me. And I get that when you have a certain opinion, people aren't going to like it. And I know people in this particular day and age, and for reasons that I do understand, but I'm saying personally for myself, he was always so great to me, and a real pleasure to be around, because he really did love the game. He loved the kids who played it, and he would do anything for them. He really would do anything for them. So, it's just, the controversy comes with kind of what our job is. If you're going to make a statement, you're going to say that. I mean, Dave Hodge, he went through some similar things that you did, that Harold didn't like what he said. And sometimes there was controversy with Dave and Hockey Night in Canada, because the Hockey Night in Canada, for people outside this country, probably, I don't know if there's a comparison, because it's not just Monday. I mean, sure, there's Monday Night Football and all the football that goes on, but Hockey Night in Canada was and has been central to every Canadian from coast to coast, especially on Saturday nights, that everybody has a feeling or an opinion, whether you love the Leafs or you hated the Leafs because you weren't from Toronto. It was the center and has been for how Canadians spend their time.
Right. And they did it way back in radio days. In fact, I put this jacket on to impress you guys. I've never worn it, but I've had it in my closet. I treasure it, and I thought you guys would appreciate
It's
the
great. Oh, look what. See, I know Dave Bastl was going to pull this out for you, Brian. Take a look at his jacket.
Yeah, but you still have one of these. I'm sure you have a closet full of
I
these.
have a couple of those. Yeah, they're very valuable, treasured by collectors now, memorabilia guys.
Not a word of a lie.
Unless somebody's been in my closet lately and pilfered them, I don't know.
Brian, are you a 42? Because this is perfect. So I have to tell you, Brian, childhood story. Back in elementary school, when the book club would come out with their monthly letter of encouraging the kids to buy, and my parents would look through everything. My mom would look, and she would always look for Peter Puck. I have every single Peter Puck book you have ever written for the Scholastic Book Club, and I can't tell you how thrilled I was to receive that book once a month, whenever it was. I know a book didn't come out once a month, but whenever your book was on that list, I have a pile of them back home in Winnipeg, and it was a major part of my childhood.
Well, isn't that nice to hear? I only planned to write one book because I was probably the 4th best writer in my family. My dad, you may know, was the author of the Hardy Boys books. And then
Yes.
My sister is quite a skilled novelist. My daughter, Brenda, is a playwright. And then there's me. And I thought I'll just write one book to show that my dad, I can write a book. And that was close to 100 books ago. And I just can't believe it. I've got this one out, A Hell of a Life in Hockey, and I'm working on one for a Winnipeg publisher about the Leafs of all teams. And then I've got a lot of kids' books in my computer that I hope to find publishers for before I start losing it up here. I put these away 5-10 years ago. So it's worked out pretty well, and much to my surprise.
Well, I think it has worked out pretty well, and we certainly have enjoyed the ride, if I can speak for Canadians, and certainly for those that love the game of hockey. But it's also the history of hockey, Brian, that you represent. And to me, that is the most important thing about any culture, is embracing what has gone on. It's the reason you get better at certain things. It's also the things that you embrace that make you better. And you have certainly done that from a broadcasting standpoint. You've done it from a literary standpoint. And I think just the fact that, at a certain age, you still continue to go on. It's a great example of how one sort of conducts their life, which is you always keep going. You always look for that next thing. And there doesn't have to be a ceiling on it. There's no age on that. It continues because you want it to continue. And that's one of the real great joys about having you on here this morning, and I knew we would enjoy it. I knew it would go by way too fast. But I just want to thank you for all that great work, the great feelings that you have given Canadians. And as Dave said, as a kid, to be able to see hockey being talked about like on NBC and Hanna-Barbera doing the actual cartoons, to me, it was like the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And Canada, had they gone to the moon and back, it still wouldn't be as good as watching Peter Buck. So on behalf of all Canadians, and certainly here at Newstalk Sauga 960, I thank you so much for being with us here this morning.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a joy, and it's nice to be remembered. So do I have time for one little trivia question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Try this on your friends. I just discovered it the other day. Number 31 on the all-time scoring list, or the all-time greats of the Toronto Maple Leafs, is a player named Babe Dye. Now, you'd think he'd be an explosive goal scorer. He never scored a point for the Toronto Maple Leafs, not a single point. He got all his goals with St. Patrick's when they were the franchise that preceded the Leafs. And then late in his career, Conn Smythe brought him back for 6 games. The only games he wore a Leaf uniform, he didn't get a point. So there he is, number 31 on the list, never has a single point for the team.
Well, I'll tell you, the only guy I wouldn't pull that on is our good friend Liam McGuire, because I bet Liam McGuire probably
he knows everything about hockey.
Yeah, no, he's the master. Brian, thank you so much for this morning. Best of luck, boy. If we could do this again sometime, this was just a joy, and we would love to do it again.
Thanks again, guys. Have a good day.